YouTube. All right, okay, so hi, nice to see you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for stopping by. My name's Christopher Jones. I've been reading hands since 1983, which is a very long time. I started learning hand reading in a group called the Physiological Society, which is in Britain. Originally founded in the 1890s and then refounded in 1975. And they were teaching it and running courses, and so I attended the course in hand reading because, like you, I thought, oh, this could be quite interesting. I wonder what it's all about. So I went to a workshop, and the woman said, oh, I'm doing a course next to. Would you like to go and do the course? I did the course. That was a 6-week course or 7-week course or something, and then there was a weekend seminar, and you might want to come to that. So I went to the weekend seminar, and the guy who was teaching that actually read my hands in that around that time as well. So I first had my hands read in June 1983. I completed the course. I read all the books. I wrote the diploma, passed the exam, and then the next year, the tutor and the head guy of the society said. He said we were on a residential seminar. He said, "Can you teach this lot how to read hands?" So I started teaching hand reading in 1984, and then I eventually became the secretary of that organisation, and I ran it for 10 years and did a lot of writing work and research work and taught hundreds of people. I've taught so many people. There's lots of people out there in the world who studied with me in the 80s and the 1990s who've had 30-year careers as professional hand readers. So there's a lot of people out there who kind of come from that sort of endeavour in that 10-year period in the 90s. Anyway, so that's kind of much for my background. I mean, I've written about 15 books on hand reading. I know most of the important hand readers around the world, and I've corresponded with them or argued with them, as you do in the subject. And one of the big arguments that we all have in palmistry and hand reading, is about this issue about fate and destiny. Because everybody who doesn't know anything about hand reading thinks, oh, the hands show your fate, and the hands show your destiny, don't they? And they go, no, actually they don't. And so then the debate is, well, but you can do prediction from the hands, and you can predict things from the hands, can't you? You go, no, actually you can't. And so there's this big argument that goes on between different traditions within hand reading about what you can and can't do from the hands. Some of them are obviously wrong, and I'm not with them. so we've got to work out what's going on with these people. Why do they think that? And where does this notion come from? Well, actually, we think probably the earliest notion about that comes from the Bible. There's a passage in the Bible, Job chapter 37, verse 7, where basically it says, God seals up the hands of every man so that every man might know his work. So it kind of has this biblical impression that, the marks in the hand are there, kind of put there by God, so that you can know what you're all about. But it's kind of like basically the idea is that the lines are sort of magically formed by some divine power, and therefore they represent something of the divinity within you. And the notion behind that is the misunderstanding that the lines of the hands don't change. Now, if you're going to have a fate or a destiny, you can't go, excuse me, it's 2:30, I want to change my fate now, please. Oh, certainly, you can change it. No, a fate, if it's a fate or it's a destiny, it's a fixed thing. You don't have any say in it. How could you have any say in it? God gave it to you. So it's like, who do you think you are? Bigger than God? No, that would be arrogant. So no, so this whole notion that somehow the Lord, the divinity, whatever, imprints these things in our hands as a kind of marker of divinity is kind of clearly from a particular viewpoint that's not actually correct. But once you have this idea that this is where this comes from, then you have the notion that your fate must be fixed or must be unchangeable in some kind of way. So, Exhibit A, I'd like you just to turn over to the illustration with me on the handout that I gave you, which is you'll see there's a pair of handprints there where the other side, the picture, not the words. The other side there's a handprint there, which is the hand of the same person taken 13 years apart. Now, if it was fated and your fate was fixed and God gave it to you and you couldn't do anything about it, and he'd sketched all those lines in your hands, then the lines couldn't change. Yet, the evidence before us, even the untrained eye, even though we do have an expert in the room here, she's read a book, it was read, so she knows all about it. if you look at the lines of the hands, can you see any differences between the lines of the hands?
Yeah.
All right. So it's the same person. The same person. Taken in, the handprint was taken in 1975 and again 1972 and then 1985. What lines do you see that are different? What do you notice?
Right in the centre.
Right in the centre.
It's kind of, it's not defined, but it's more
That's
defined.
called bad printing technique. That's
Okay.
not actually a change in the line. It just means someone wasn't very good at taking out. Yes, well spotted. See, I told you she was an expert. If you look at underneath the fingers, there's a line that wasn't there before that's completely appeared in the hand on the right. Can you see that one she's talking about? It's completely appeared. It wasn't there at all. All right. Any other? There's quite a lot of lines there. Just a couple is all that's needed, really. Can you see any other changes? Yeah, that's right. So that's the little short line there, and it's grown really long. But look at this line. Yeah, but look where it ends up down there. It's right down there. Can you see that? There's more lines on that part of the hand, but I've also wanted to point out that line that's changed all the way down there. You see, it doesn't go down there. Can you see that? It doesn't really matter how many lines you can see that have changed. If you can see one line that's changed, then you know that the hand isn't recording anything that's fixed. The hands change. So the hands change over time. That means the lines of the hand don't show your fixed fate or destiny in that kind of way. They can't possibly be showing anything fixed because they change. And because they change, that's also why it's impossible to do predictions from the lines of the hand. Because you don't know in advance of them happening how they're going to change. So you couldn't possibly say. The implications of an headline that's that length and short or that length and long are very, very different. It shows a very different temperament, shows a very different personality, it shows someone who's doing something very different. And this guy was a bricklayer and a martial artist, and he worked in London. He had no education, he left school at 16, and by 1985, in 1972 actually, the year those handprints were taken, that's when he became a monk. He became a Zen monk. He taught himself how to read languages like Sanskrit and Japanese. He ended up translating texts, Buddhist texts, from one language to another, and he wrote about 30 books. So this is what you've got there is the development of the intellect of the headline going down there, and someone who's very interested in understanding and analysing things in a way that's completely different from how he was before, which was a much more pragmatic way of thinking. So because he's changed his life and the way he's living his life, the lines on his hands change. So that's the point. The point is the lines of the hands show what's going on with you now, and they're not. It's not an unalterable destiny or an unalterable fate. So if the lines weren't put there by God, how did they get there? How the lines? Sorry?
DNA.
DNA is a big thing. What does that mean? What causes lifestyle?
The way you do things.
No, the way you think, who you are, what your personality, exactly. Help us. Yeah, what you do is because of what you are, and what you are is things like your personality and also your DNA. So that's a really interesting point. I actually think it's an admixture of three different things, and I'll unpack that. But DNA is one of them. And how do we know that? Because if you look at the hands of parents and children, they have very similar line formations, or you can see echoes of lines. So, for example, the headline or airline in my passive hand, my left hand, is almost exactly the same as the headline in my father's active hand. My headline in my active hand is like the headline in the passive hand of my mother. So you can see lineal formations that have come down from parent to child. If you take the handprints of identical twins, and I do happen to have some handprints of identical twins, I forgot to bring my folder with me, it's over there, but if you have a look at those, you can see that they, as you'd expect, identical twins look almost identical, don't they? So their hands are also almost identical in terms of the lines. And what you get is actually something of the differences between the two, because of course identical twins are never exactly identical, even if they look identical. It's a little known fact, but identical twins don't have identical fingerprint patterns, for example. Everybody knows that fingerprint patterns are unique, and majority of in cases in identical twins, 9 out of 10 fingerprint patterns will be the same, and one fingerprint pattern will be different. It's usually the fingerprint on the index finger too. So, so even the hands of identical twins aren't identical; they're completely unique. But when you look at the lines, you see similarities in the lines and some differences. So they're not entirely, genetics is not the entire answer. It's a big answer, part of the answer for sure, but it's not the entire answer because there must be other things. So what else could it be?
Just life experience.
Exactly. So you've got nature, and now you've got nurture. So you've got nature and nurture. So that's what we notice about the lines, how they change. They change according to life experiences. One of the easiest ways you can see that is that if someone's ill, if they're ill, they'll have all sorts of lineation on the hand that shows stress, the conditions of disease, the poor condition of the organs. 6 or 7 months later, they've recovered from the disease. All those lines will have gone. You can see it in things like menopause. Young women have no indications of menopause, obviously, and then you take the handprints again when they hit their 50s, bam, the lines are changed because of the endocrinological changes that are happening around menopause. So the hands reflect the sort of changes that are going on psychologically, but also physiologically as well, over and above the DNA component. So the hand is really showing what's happening in that person at that particular time. So environmental factors like illnesses or endocrinological changes, psychological changes, trauma is another big thing. You can see a lot of trauma in the hand. So people who had traumatic experiences, they'll record in the hand. And in any one family, you might have two identical twins. One of them was traumatized, one of them wasn't, and that would be some of the differences that they've got. Although their experiences by and large will be similar, when you see lineal differences, those lineal differences are often down to different kinds of experiences that that person's had. The third thing is the je ne sais quoi, the I don't know and who God knows way, because we're not just simply a product of genetics, and we're not just a reaction to our environment. There's another component. I like to call it the karmic or the spiritual dimension. It's a bit, we don't know, but you can see that not everything in the hand is just experience, and not everything in hand is genetics. So there's something else going on, and you kind of get a measure of that when you're looking at hands, because you can sort of see where a child is similar to a parent. You can see where certain things have happened to them in their lives that have impacted them, and then there's just other random factors so, that you can't predict, you couldn't tell, you wouldn't know. So I think there's scope for a third thing too. So one of the ways in which the lines of the hand form is definitely through genetics. In terms of the sort of mechanistic theory about it, one of the important things to realise is that the lines of the hand form really early in the development of the human being. Do you know when they form?
As a fetus at some point, I'm sure.
You're quite right. Any idea when?
Maybe 6 weeks.
You're bang on actually. They start forming at 6 weeks. Between the 7th and 9th week of gestation, that's when they form. So between the 7th and 9th week of gestation, that's when the lines start forming in the hand. And what's interesting about that is that's before the hands can move, and it's around the same time as the nervous system is being laid down in the body. So we think that the lines are actually formed particularly by neurological activity and the functioning of the brain, the functioning of the mind, because there's more nerve endings in the hand, connecting the hand and the brain, between the brain and any other part of the body. But when you realise that the lines are actually forming in utero at the same time as the nervous system is being laid down, that seems to be the big connection. But when you start looking at handprints of people who've had things like electroconvulsive therapy, you see their lines are shattered. You see people who've got no neurologically dead, are physically alive but neurologically dead, like catatonic schizophrenics, they have almost no lines on their hands at all. So the amount of lineation on the hand is a function of the amount of neurological activity. So a hand with lots and lots of lines is just a really worried, stressed out person with lots of anxiety. And a hand which has very few lines on it is a very calm person who really doesn't have any worries or cares in the world at all. So that's where we think where the lines come from. The lines are not formed by God, but probably the best argument for who and what the lines are is a combination of genetics and the neurology, the biology of the nervous system, basically, and how human experience interacts with the brain, which then imprints but who knows how that actually works. I mean, I'm sure scientists don't even know either, you know, but you know, there is some mechanism. We know that we have experience, we know it affects us, we know that trauma gets locked in the body, we know that we feel differently in when our body's moving through different phases. You know, but there is this interaction between the body and mind. Essentially, the notion of hand reading is an appreciation and an acceptance of this sort of mind-body connection. And therefore, we are not entirely fixed by destiny and fate, genetics. Genetics is really just another language for fate and destiny, if you think about it. We are a product of that, but also a product of environment, but also a product of our experience. And the hands will reflect that as we go through life. They will change accordingly. So the hands don't predict the future, they tell you about the present. I can predict your future only on the basis of if you carry on exactly as you are now, you'll be exactly the same in 20 years' time. That's the basis for which you can do prediction. And that kind of takes away the possibility of choosing or making any choice in your life.